Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Edge Report. I'm Chris Moeller. I've got Mike Hathorne today. Mike's an author, urban strategist, and consultant that specializes in demographic change, housing markets, and community design. He has a strong and relentless passion for community building and is dedicated to shaping walkable, diverse neighborhoods and centers through strategic planning and design. It's going to be a great conversation and pick up right where we left off from last guest, Kevin Sutherland, and our ongoing theme of stable living. So, Mike, welcome to the Edge Report.
Hey, thank you for the invitation.
This is great. So, we met on a LinkedIn post because you had this little funny thing that you decided to put out here called a book called The Great Housing Reversal. Why don't we talk about that a second?
Yeah, absolutely. Where would you like to start? There's
Well,
there's
what
a
what was the impetus? What's the impetus behind the Great Housing
oh
Reversal?
boy. My entire career has kind of revolved around seeing where the gaps are in the system. I got into the real estate business kicking and screaming a little bit. My dad dragged me into it to work for him selling new homes for a home builder. And I noticed immediately that there was a disconnect in terms of what I believed we should be doing and what we were actually doing. And that nagging feeling just followed me. It's just followed me through my career. I noticed it in terms of my personal tastes and my inability to find housing that met my personal tastes. I was, some would, I guess, call me odd that I actually enjoyed townhome living. And so I was looking for townhomes that were larger than the market was producing. Couldn't understand why I couldn't find what interested me. And, then I started recognizing that there were differences in development patterns that were frustrating me. I've never been a car guy. And I've always been frustrated by the need to have a car, that a car, in my opinion, is a prosthetic device if you need to do anything. I couldn't understand why I couldn't take care of things either on a bike or on foot and have it be something where I wasn't taking my life into my hands to do it. And then it started to get very, I guess, on a professional level. I started doing a lot of research within different projects that I was working on as it pertained to the relationships and development patterns relative to neighborhood creation, relative to proximity to being able to meet my daily needs or daily needs, and then started digging into the demographics of household types versus housing types. I was noticing a very strong disconnect there in terms of the housing we were producing and the household types that exist and I guess the gap between the two. So, I'm a bit of a statistics junkie. So I'll spend a Saturday just digging into things just to try and understand it, to answer questions for myself. And, over the course of I'd probably say 10 to 15 years, I'd been doing writing as a form of therapy because what I was finding and what others were telling me were different. And so I had to have an outlet to try and justify my own thinking. And then just within probably the past month, things accelerated because of some things at work that just really forced me to lock in on actually assembling things and putting them into a book form, because I was trying to answer questions that I was, I guess, in conflict with in relation to my employer. They were saying things a particular way that I didn't feel was accurate, and so I wanted to dig into that to try and answer the question and the questions that were being asked, and it got to this place where I had material that I felt was solid enough to self-publish and see what the response was.
What's the response been? I devoured it in a very short amount of time, and related to it, and we'll go through sort of the whole outline and crux of the book here in a
Yeah.
second. But how's the response been?
It's been rather interesting, and it's been frankly, it's been comforting to know that I'm not crazy. That, that there are others that recognize the same things, and it's been very validating that, that the thinking is sound. And it's, the it's more than just the thinking. I mean, that's where, the intuition had to be justified by fact. And that's where, it got to digging into statistics to try and understand, okay, what exactly are the percentages of the different household types that exist? And how have households changed as we've gone from baby boomers to Gen X to millennials to Gen Z? Um, and understanding the residential real estate market and understanding what the outputs are from zoning it's very, very apparent what's going on. There is an absolute disconnect between what people need and what we're producing.
Yes.
And what we're producing is based on what zoning will allow to be produced. So it's
Yes.
not, the real estate development is very different from other markets. Let's, compare and contrast it to technology as an example. If a need is seen in the technology business, you can just attack it and try and come up with solutions. The real estate market is very heavily regulated in a number of ways that don't allow you to move quickly. It moves very, very slow. And during the course of things moving slow, if you're in the development business, all you can do is stick to the path that you're allowed to walk. And so what we've done for, you know, I'm going to say probably in the neighborhood of 25, 30 years, we have overcommitted to single family detached housing as household types have changed. And in a sense, the traditional family of two parents and children has fragmented and become a myriad of other household types. You have these other household types that don't have the same needs as a single family detached home with 4 bedrooms. You need different product to meet the needs of these different household types, and we're not producing it.
Yeah, that's right. So that just for the listeners, the name of the book is The Great Housing Reversal and the New American Dream. It's broken into 5 parts across 15 chapters. So what I'd like to do is kind of take 5, maybe 10 minutes on each part, maybe a little bit less, maybe 7 minutes each, and then leave some time for us to kind of riff at the end because it
Yeah,
really does a great job sort of setting the stage. So the first one is, I'll read them all so we know where we're going. The first one is the great demographic shift. Housing is at an inflection point. We've got the great senior short sale. I like to call that the silver tsunamis. All the boomers that are
yeah,
entering into the world, entering into the retirement world. And then we've got the future of generational demand. That's kind of the first part of the great demographic shift. Then we go into the misalignment crisis, zoning and land use, fragmented households, hybrid work, plus supply, a little bit of the 40-year-old average home, single family home. Not only is the home, the product market supply inadequate, but it's also aging. Then reimagining growth. I think reimagining growth is kind of interesting what that looks like in terms of housing for the future. And then financing and building that future plus a conclusion at the end. So let's go back to the top here and let's talk about the great demographic shift. We're Gen X, right? We talked
yeah,
about that a little bit.
yep,
Here to save the day. I leave my cape in my car, but we do have that perspective. We see our aging parents, and some of us have teen kids. I have teen kids, so I see both sides of upward mobility and age in place, and the inadequacy of the product market that's on the product type that's on the market now. So let's dive into the great demographic shift.
yeah. I think I'll start by saying, as Gen X, where we're a smaller generation in terms of total volume compared to baby boomers above us and the millennials and Gen Z below us. We have this front row seat as to what's occurring on both sides of us. Above us with the baby boomers, they were basically the inflection point of the single family detached home, the traditional family of two parents and kids. And we had, coming out of World War II, we had the federal government going all in on delivering housing. They solved the financial aspect of it through backing mortgages. They helped to encourage the single family detached home through HUD. We also had, all of these, the prior generation, the great generation coming back from World War II and had learned how to, just to crank out product assembly line style. They were able to meet the need, and all of the government policy associated with the delivery of all of that was embedded in the zoning to say, this is how you do it. These are the rules to follow. And there was wide open ground to build neighborhoods as far as the eye could see. What's interesting is that as when you think about any person going through their life cycle of housing, your needs will change over time. And the baby boomers who created the demand for the single family detached home, they're so large in number that the demand for the detached home has completely flipped. And what the baby boomers want now is the exact opposite. They need something that is much smaller. They need something that allows them mobility. They want to be able to age in place without having it be prison style, which means that they have to be proximate to their daily needs, because, many of them are losing the ability to be able to drive. So they don't want to be stuck. But they're also in this weird spot, because in order to move to that lifestyle that they both want and need, they have to jettison what they have, which is the crux of the silver tsunami, or the great senior short sale. There's a friend of mine by the name of Arthur C. Nelson. He's a professor at the University of Arizona. He's been writing about this for 20 years, saying this is coming, this is coming, this is coming. And here we are. We're right in the throes of it. The challenge in them jettisoning the homes that they have is there's nobody to buy. I shouldn't say nobody. The numbers aren't there to buy them, which is why it's referred to as a short sale. They're stuck. You got to have a buyer to buy the home that you have in order to move on. And if Gen X isn't buying them, because we're at the tail end of our our millennials and Gen Z, they don't want those homes. They can't afford the homes. They're the most fragmented in terms of household type. They need smaller. They want to connect to experience rather than oh geez, what's the word? Isolation. A lot of what senior or single family detached homes provide is isolation in terms of lifestyle, and that's not what the generations coming up want. They want experience. They want to engage. They want to connect.
Right. And, one of we'll get into the finance behind it as well, but like a lot of those folks too, aging boomers, they don't have a note left. So they're paying taxes and insurance, but they're not paying a mortgage in principal. So they don't have much of an option either, because if they do move from the family home, they're going to be subject, and they want to own, they're going to be subject to a whole new economic situation that they're not there yet. We'll shelf that thought for a second, and let's talk about the misalignment crisis, We talked about being at an inflection point, the silver tsunami, or the silver short, or the great short sale, senior short sale, and then the future of generational demand. Let's talk about the misalignment crisis associated with supply demand.
So the misalignment really stems from, how I mentioned, we have these within the real estate business and development. The feedback loops are really long. And so in order to fix things, it takes an inordinate amount of time. The crux of what needs to be fixed, there's a number of things that need to be fixed, but where I've spent a lot of my career and focus is on zoning. I equate zoning to DNA in nature. And if you want to build a walkable, mixed residential, mixed use neighborhood, you can't just go out and do it. There are a set of rules that say whether or not you're able to do that. And we're well behind the curve around the country being, having that DNA available to be able to build in that format. So what that does to the residential home builder is they have to work from what's available to them in terms of that DNA. The problem with that is that we're oversaturating the market with what the market doesn't need. And so for somebody that is in a particular household type that doesn't necessarily fit the criteria of a single family detached home, it puts them in a position where they either have to choose a different path, which typically is renting, or having to compromise and buy something that is maybe too big and then pull in roommates, which then puts them in a neighborhood where they become the oddball demographically within that neighborhood. Because when all of the housing is the same, the demographics are the same. And if the housing is intended for traditional families and you're the single guy buying the house with a couple roommates to help you meet your mortgage, you really don't fit. So that's something that needs to be corrected ASAP. We have to deal with the DNA and allow the DNA to deliver these mixed use walkable neighborhoods. And when I say what mixed use to that, the purpose of that is, there's a couple reasons for it. One of them is so that you have access to those things and the car becomes it's no longer a prosthetic. It's a choice that you're making. You have the opportunity to choose between walking, biking, or taking the car. The other is there's an affordability play that goes along with being able to have your daily needs proximate that can equate to anywhere from a $5,000 to $10,000 pay raise in a job just because you're reducing your automobile expenses through having access to things directly as opposed to, having to get in your car every single time you need to take care of something. And that's gonna take a while. We still have I just stopped myself from saying something.
You can let it out here.
Municipal policy is still controlled by the baby boomers. It's my feeling that the Great Recession has kept baby boomers working longer than they probably would have otherwise have liked to. And so they control, they hold the keys to changing the policy. And it becomes difficult for them to want to do that because it's an admission of guilt that things aren't working the way that they need to. And two, it means that they have to retool.
Or we have to retool.
Yeah, it forces some obsolescence from them from a career standpoint if the retooling is occurring under their watch. because they're not
Well,
as
now,
prepared for
Mike,
it.
you're at where I decided to leave the office development world and get into the residential world, because to me, the future of work was the future of living. So for the readers, I want to just read the definition of Euclidean zoning, because this came up with a conversation with Kevin Sutherland 2 weeks ago that I published last week. He's the town manager in a small coastal town in Maine called Newcastle. Euclidean zoning separates land uses into distinct zones. For example, residential, commercial, industrial, while form-based zoning prioritizes the physical character of development by focusing on the form of the buildings and their relationship to the street and the public space, allowing for more mixed uses within the same area. So what we're talking about is a traditional Euclidean zoning shifting into
Yeah.
form-based and more vernacular design to
Yeah.
allow for a more modern type of living.
Yes. Yeah, because part of the struggle on the mixed use side is the mixed use zoning that you're seeing hit the books right now, and it have been hitting the books for probably the past 15 years, is it's just a different form of use-based or Euclidean zoning. It's mixed use by ratio, saying this mixed use zone requires you to deliver X% residential, X% commercial, X% office, hypothetically. And
And
the
it's all tied to
problem,
capital markets, right?
yeah,
Isn't it tied to capital markets? So
well,
that's part
it
of the
yeah, and that's part of that's part of what needs to change as well. Is we don't have the financial tools to deliver because these are foreign products. It's easy to bundle residential mortgages today because they're basically the same thing. It's more difficult if you're trying to bundle loans, if they exist, for, let's say, a mixed use project. So, we have work to do to basically to set the table that will allow for the change to occur, because the demand is there. It's indisputable. And if the demand can be met, then I think we create more stability in the real estate market as a whole. Part of the imbalance that we have today is that it's not fine-tuned to what the market needs. The other key, and I think you'll relate to this, Chris, the thing that government doesn't understand about the real estate industry is that the developer has another form of regulation that they have to follow, which is the market. It's unwritten, but it's, if the developer doesn't obey what the market is telling him to do, then his project is going to fail if the project even gets off the ground.
okay.
So there really is a need for municipal governments to have a better understanding of that aspect, so that they don't overreach into areas that the market is actually regulating on behalf of government.
Well, there's so that sort of brings us into reimagining growth. One of the things that I think is interesting is seeing different industrialized systems and what ends up happening when you commoditize a product. So we can look at, for example, the farming industry, agricultural. Most of what we produce in the United States is an export commodity. So soy, corn, wheat, cotton, even very little of that happening, but very little that we actually produce to eat. We produce to create this economic engine. Same with housing. If we look at our housing stock of single family 1,800 square foot, 3-bedroom homes, they're being built by 4-ish developers across the country by the thousands in each neighborhood. So, we sort of need to reimagine growth if that's the product that we're putting on the table, and it's dependent upon cars, and it's dependent upon utility, and it's dependent upon water systems. Maybe it's time for us to revisit what the growth mindset means,
Yeah,
especially if that's not necessarily what the market wants. So
yeah,
in office, if you look at distressed debt, the reason why offices aren't performing well, to your last point, is because the market is determining that folks don't want to go to it. at a rate at which they used to. So that's already shifted. So
Yep.
what's happening with housing? Probably the same thing. Single family residential suburban homes are mostly going unwanted. A, they're hard to get into. B, they're not the product mix or the missing middle product that these folks want, whether they're
Yeah.
aging or whether they're rising. So,
Yeah.
how do we reimagine growth so that it can boost the entire economy rather than be these tiny little infills of pocket neighborhoods here and there?
In my mind, I think it's prioritization. It's, are we prioritizing commodity, or are we prioritizing community? To your point about getting into delivering living and lifestyle, that that's a prioritization towards community. If you look at the way that my book talks about it, it talks about the need for connectedness, and that the generations, Gen X was where things started to fragment in terms of traditional family, and then it started to break with the millennials, and Gen Z is, they're just having to run around and pick up pieces. But what they want, and I think it's a sign of what the generations have been through. The fact that the priority tends to lean towards community and connecting. That, in a sense, it goes back to the fact that the nuclear family is meant to provide a degree of stability, and when that stability doesn't exist, you have to find it somewhere else. The place, if it can't be within a family, then it really ought to be within a community.
Yes.
So, I think I really feel like when you think about growth, reimagining growth, it's trying to get away from this idea that everything is a commodity, it's a widget, and you think more about how to put the pieces together correctly. And that's really, in my opinion, the basis of a form-based code. Because it's not just about use and volume of density. It's, what when you put the pieces together, taking the land, creating access to the land, putting structures on the land, and delivering open space to go with the structures and the access. It's a more fine-tuned way of looking at how you deliver neighborhoods and centers that are going to better serve the human being and enhance the life of the person. We have been so far away from that for so long, and we really really have to get back to it. We really really do.
Folks don't even recognize it, Mike. I love that you mentioned that because it'll remind me to remind my listeners that the entire 7 episodes from season 3 was about emergence. And emergence, the whole purpose of that season was to rethink the XY graph, bottom left to top right, always up, number go up. And to think about the fact that we are part of a bigger natural system and our activity in it and contribution to it is part of the whole.
Yeah.
You mentioned DNA earlier, and that's where stable living is for me. I'm trying to create with our infill neighborhoods and with our models, I'm trying to create exactly that emergence for people to be comfortable and rooted, but also engaged and fulfilled. And those wraparound services have nothing to do necessarily with wealth generation. They have everything to do with stability and comfort, and not potentially moving away from equity based wealth building, but to explore all avenues of wealth building and to
Yeah.
start with ourselves.
Yeah. So, I mean, one way of looking at it, the commodity mindset is intent on trying to maximize revenue. And, at the end of the day, we all still need to make a living. So it's not many folks are in a position to do things for philanthropic purposes when it comes to community building. There are some out there, and there's some great stories out there about that. But I think, to your point, the way that we need to be looking at it from a community standpoint is it really needs to be more about optimizing revenue. When you optimize, yes, you're giving up some upside, but the reason for doing it is for the betterment of the whole. You're doing it to help serve the community through giving back in terms of the practices that you undertake and the business decisions that you make that actually help to strengthen the neighborhoods that you're creating.
Yeah, Michael Easter does a really good job talking about gear versus stuff. I don't know if you ever read his book, Scarcity Brain. There's two books that he's got, The Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain. I read those a while back, and it informed some of our model for sure because of the fact that we have also grown to this massive home size need, and then a storage unit, and then a detached garage,
Yeah.
potentially even a second home full of the same shit that we didn't need in our first house, depending on how much excess, or success we've seen in our lives. And really kind of getting back to this notion of need versus want and the shared economy as part of the exploration of revisiting the growth mindset. Again, I'm not saying we should all share everything that we have. I'm not saying that we should throw away the econometrics of capitalism that got us here. But I do think that starting to become awake, aware, or even conscious of our collection of shit that we don't need is
Yeah.
super, super important. Because what ends up happening is what happened. We've got an aging community of boomers in a home that is outsized with a bunch of shit that we don't want in it. And that's no way to end this game, in my opinion. I don't care to go that way, but that's to me reimagining or reconsidering the growth mindset. Is wouldn't it be nice to grow ourselves and grow internally and grow our communities in value and benefit and get away from all the shit?
Yeah. Well, and you think, if you think in terms of the betterment of the individual, I read a study in my book that was done by a Harvard professor named Raj Chetty, where they evaluated 72 million Facebook user profiles to see where folks are connected to each other in terms of the ability to deliver upward mobility financially. And
Hmm.
we're able to correlate that based on relationships. If you knew somebody, you lived in a neighborhood and had access to somebody that you're a Walmart guy and you have access to a Nordstrom guy in your neighborhood, that that relationship on average can equate to a lifetime increase of wealth building of around 20%. And you start to think of that in terms of the blossoming effect as you're able to do this, the impact on the one and the paying it forward that then starts to spread. I mean, how often do you hear developers talk about that sort of thing in terms of what they're doing? Thinking about the thinking about the social impact that they potentially are going to have in the neighborhood that they are developing. I mean, it's
I don't hear it unless it's somewhere here in the Southeast and they're using it for marketing to target boomers to move into aging communities, 55 plus. That's where they use it all the time, but that's
yeah,
it.
yeah, it's where we I think what I guess the hope that I have, and looking at what I was trying to shed a light on with the book, and the hope that comes from it is that things potentially are triangulating towards both the need and the desire to deliver the right things for the right reasons. And in doing that, we'll also understand we're going to make money doing it. But in making money doing it, it's then a question of what am I only doing it for the money, or are there some opportunities to do the right thing think past the ribbon cutting to closing the last home and thinking about what's the impact going to be 10 years after I'm done and out of this neighborhood. What have I left behind in terms of a legacy for those homeowners in perpetuity as homes are bought and sold? And to me, therein lies a huge opportunity as it pertains to delivering mixed residential, because in delivering mixed residential, the diversity in the neighborhood allows the neighborhood to be more balanced. The market of that neighborhood isn't oversaturated in one thing. It's a richer experience living there because not everybody is exactly the same. You have an opportunity of being able to meet and be mentored by some, and the opportunity to mentor others. All of this is based on what actually gets planned, designed, and built day one. Back when I was in graduate school, I took a planning economics class, and we had to do a big study. And I did this study based on trying to correlate the relationship between home values and test scores. And it's, I mean, that study has been done a multitude of times. I was not the first nor the last one to do it. And common sense will tell you that there is a correlation, a very strong correlation. The higher the home values, the higher the test scores in the schools. And I closed my research paper by posing the question to my professor that could it not be considered that the future test scores are actually baked in at the time that the neighborhood is planned and designed. When you think about how development occurs and how neighborhoods feed schools, and if you decide the future of a neighborhood being homes of a particular size that are meant to fill a particular need of a given household that makes a certain amount of money, you are creating predestination for those future test scores.
A very interesting way to look at it, because it's always about per square foot. Always, 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 always.
Yeah. So, why not as a developer, shouldn't we think more holistically in terms of what we're doing and what those impacts are? Shouldn't municipal government, as another example, shouldn't they understand the business side of development better than they do, understand the market so that they know where to start and where to stop when it comes to policy? Because the minute
The
they
quick
lean
answer to
in,
that is yes, absolutely. And we have to lean into that.
yeah, it requires discipline to do that. And I think human beings are innately lazy. So it's hard to say, well, you're telling me I have to know this and this. I'm naturally curious. So I will geek out over a weekend on a given issue just because. But that's just,
Yes.
that's just me.
It's all the hose water you drank when you were a kid,
That's right.
because you're Gen X and you were left to your own faculties. And inside
That's
of here
right.
is where creativity happens. And
Yep.
it goes well with hose water.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, so we've got about 15 minutes left, and we still
Okay.
have one more topic. And we kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's the financial side of things. As you know, Pathway Communities is an emerging model that is upward mobility and explores ownership in a new way. We buried two words early: sustainability and affordability. Duh, we want both. So we're not even talking about them. We're just incorporating both of them. And that's part of our stable living model. But we're getting there by two different methods that are still very hypothetical. One is a deed restricted land grant, and using those mechanisms to create affordability in perpetuity, which takes away from the capitalistic mindset of wealth generation over time, which is an interesting concept. But we borrowed some of that from Habitat for Humanity. And the other one is the OpCo-PropCo model, which is the operating company, property company, which is a sort of an emerging model that allows some disintermediation in this cycle of asset ownership from inception and delivery of product to management of product to transfer of product. We're going to kind of try to disintermediate some of that through the OpCo-PropCo model. So how do we reinvest in this financial architecture of housing, as you put it, munis to mortgages?
Well, I think there's some interesting opportunities that could materialize in that area. I think one is as a resident of a neighborhood, there needs to be opportunities. I'm really hitting hard on the developer needing to, to think more macro and broadly. As a resident of a neighborhood, I think the same thing has to happen. And I think what you're providing is the opportunity for the resident to buy into different delivery mechanisms that are not simply about that one person, but it's about the next person as well. And as a resident, leaving things better than when you got there, I think be a way to think about it. From an investment standpoint, one of the ideas that I threw out was that from an investment standpoint, as a resident, if you have the opportunity of being able to live in a mixed residential, walkable mixed use community, and as part of that community, you have an opportunity to micro invest. Investing in development is, it's big bucks, but if you think about a blockchain strategy and micro investment, the opportunity to invest into a community trust of some sort that allows you to be not just a stakeholder, but an investor at a certain level. There's an opportunity to be able to protect the community a little differently than the legal structures that we have, HOAs and CCNRs. There's a heavier financial opportunity and an opportunity to care more because of that. We have to figure out how to create capital stacks that will support these mixed residential, walkable mixed use neighborhoods, because they don't exist. You gotta be pretty scrappy as a developer to find the financing to do those things. And
We're trying. You see these bruises? You see all these bruises? I've been at it, and there are impact investors finally starting to emerge because the message is getting out, and it is relatable now. It was so far from relatable 2 years ago. I look at it as a derivative, Mike. I think that, and I didn't look at it this way originally, not what I set out to do. The worse the economy gets, the better our product looks.
Yeah.
I didn't set out to do that. Orion Growth never did that. We're an XY company, bottom left to top right, hockey stick all the time, right? Because we were always playing in office assets, and we wanted to see this increase rate of return over time until we started thinking this way through Emergence. And now we see the value and benefit a little bit differently, or in addition to traditional GPLP agreements with IRR. And that long-term stability is actually infrastructure when you really get into it. And the small towns are the ones that are seeing it the most because they're having a tough time with attrition, of residential attrition, not job people, but just people. Small towns, have lost a lot of their community to younger generations, to the cities. That's been happening for a long time. When we look at this as an impact investment for workforce development, community development, and we create stable living models that have walkability, there's a value and a benefit that far transcends a traditional IRR, cutting a ribbon and selling a home.
Yeah. Well, and you think about the younger generations, the connectedness that they want, it really pushes them toward more urban environments. And what you're doing is you're providing the opportunity of connected delivery at a more rural or suburban level. And in my mind, it just very intuitively, it makes sense to me that the younger generations will come back to those small towns if those pieces are in place and put together. But from the small town standpoint, unless they have a benefactor like you, it it becomes difficult to do. Because your
It
your
does.
your your
But they have a fish
mindset,
they gotta fish in a different pond. Everybody's gotta fish in a different pond, and
yeah,
that's really what it is creating it's market category creation.
yeah,
And this market category doesn't really exist. It does tangentially, and it does at the edge, which is why we're talking about it. This is the edge report.
yeah,
It does exist at the edge, but there are key elements that infrastructure that the rural cities aren't thinking about too. Rural broadband, number one. If you don't have this connection, the ability to have digital equity and access to information, you're way behind. So that's a
yep,
like for us when we're doing site selection and trying to work with small towns and municipalities, the first questions are zoning and planning and whether they're Euclidean or form based. And the second questions are always infrastructure. It's not water and sewer because we can even solve those now and power. We can solve that. Really, rural broadband and access to information is probably our biggest key element.
yeah. That's part of connectedness. You're absolutely right. If you're disconnected in that way, you're disadvantaged in being able to attract.
So we got 5 minutes left. We said that we would sort of conclude. We talked about from the beginning the sort of generational gap and the great demographic shift. We talked about misalignment and how the product market mix isn't quite necessarily aligned with the market itself. We reimagined growth more into an emergent mindset. And then we talked about how to finance and build the future. What did we miss?
Boy, I think what I would offer in all of this, and I've hinted at it a little bit, but I think it's important to just completely direct with it is, while the business is building physical infrastructure, it's building, homes in neighborhoods, in towns, for the purpose of employment and so forth. I would like to, and this is something I'm preaching to the choir because this is what you're doing, but I guess I'm appealing to those outside of just the two of us in terms of our thinking is we need to think in terms of the impact on people's lives. It needs to be part of our decision making. The decision shouldn't be just about if we put granite countertops in the kitchen, are we going to sell more homes? It's about the impact of creating place and the betterment of the people's lives of those that will inhabit the places that we're creating. The best opportunity, in my opinion, that we have to do that in terms of development patterns are traditional neighborhood developments. We're gonna learn from TND and we'll probably end up with a model that's better than TND. But I think the first step out of the Euclidean commodity-based mindset is the delivery of TNDs. And those that are, those developers in that space, they tend to think more holistically. They are thinking about the impacts of their developments, past selling the last home and being able to get outside of the warranty period with the city. You know, they they are thinking legacy. They are thinking in terms of, every single household that either moves in or moves out and the impact that's made while they're there. I think that's how we need to think and position ourselves as developers.
I agree 100%. And I will add one more form factor to the conversation since it didn't come up and it's near and dear to my heart is adaptive reuse. We have so much value in our current asset base that could be reimagined. Uh, when we talk about traditional neighborhood developments, we often think about greenfield and
Yep.
cul-de-sacs. And that's crazy because that's not traditional, that's modern traditional. Traditional was grid, traditional was more form-based before we went Euclidean. And what we
Yeah.
really need to do is start to think about the fact that we've got a massive amount of inventory in existing stock of buildings and how we can reimagine those. Now, that conversation in my old world has been sort of hijacked from what I mean by that into the narrative of taking a central business district tower and turning it into apartments, for affordable housing. That is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about looking at opportunities in these small towns that have an economic development opportunity, an empty storefront, and how we can rethink the economic development for these rural towns as a result of layering in that value and benefit of community through a walkable neighborhood.
No, that's a great point. I have a chapter in my book on retrofitting suburbia and the need that I think we have, and it starts with policy. But how do we thicken up existing neighborhoods? How do we do tear downs of some of these large lot single family homes and bring in missing middle housing, and not have the neighborhood get up in arms? Allowing for accessory dwelling units, very gentle density that's pretty hidden when you think about it. And it actually helps with the affordability because you're subsidizing your mortgage, through the accessory dwelling unit. So I I think being cognizant of what we can do in the existing environment and not just think in terms of greenfield. My career has been in greenfield, so my brain tends to go there. And unfortunately, it's the easiest route to take, because to try and change a neighborhood that is rooted in Euclidean zoning, that neighborhood is permanently embedded in amber, and it can be very difficult to get it to molt and change in a way that it probably should for the health of the community.
Well, Mike, we're at an hour, and I promised everybody over the years that we would stick to an hour. At 1.5, it's a perfect 45-minute walk to listen to us. So hopefully we've enlightened some folks on their walk during this conversation. I do very much appreciate your time and energy and effort and perspective into this. So where can they find your book, Mike? I want to hold this up again for folks that are watching.
Yeah, the book it's only on Amazon. I've had some people yell and scream at me for that, but I self-published it through Amazon Direct Publishing, so it's the only place to get it. I've never written a book before, so there was a learning curve to it. And, not being all that great with authority as a Gen Xer, it was very appealing to know that I was both author and editor and didn't have to answer to somebody. So it's available on Amazon. It's available in Kindle, softcover, hardcover, and if all goes well, it will be available as an audio book maybe by this weekend.
Excellent. Well, Mike, thank you for taking the time and spending the time with us. And keep on going, man. I love the book and I love the message.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was fun to talk.
You bet.